Hey, Siva Distance Project Tribe. This is Eric Romanak, and today we are interviewing Christine Schirtzinger. And let me just tell you a little bit about Christine. First of all, her business is T2 Coaching, and she coaches Girls Gone Try team and the Valley Below, which is BELO. That's the French word for bicycle. But also, she's my running coach, and I found her on Phil Maffetone's website, and she is one of the founding coaches. And we're going to get into a little bit more of what that means. She's also certified at USAT, USA Cycling, USA Swimming, Training Peaks, and Swim Speed as well. So she's definitely a triathlete, even though today we're probably going to focus a little bit more on the running side of things, but I'm sure she'll tell you that these principles transfer over to all sports. So welcome, Christine. Thank you for doing this.
Well, thank you, Eric, so much for having me. I look forward to talking with everybody today, and I've so enjoyed working with you over the last 6 months, and I'm so grateful for everything you've taught me along the way, too. And it's been great to integrate your knowledge of functional strength and proper body movement that I really appreciate everything that you've shared with me. And so it's been.
Well, thank you. That's awesome. We've had great conversations. This 6 months. I think, I'm 44 years old, and I have been continuing to peak. And even though my race got canceled, like a lot of people's did, you and I are still working together because the value and the information that you are helping me process about running and endurance sports has just been phenomenal, and I just can't replace it. I look forward to the years ahead. I want to tell our viewers real quick, kind of the quick little origin story of how I found you.
Okay.
I was overtraining essentially. I was kind of going with the more is more philosophy, trying to get faster, and I was coming off of a marathon and like not getting any better. I had a conversation with a friend of mine, Bradley Schulte, who's a founding member of the Siva Distance Project as well, and he was doing what was called Maffetone training, which was a heart rate based training to kind of build up an aerobic base, just to make it very generic. There's a lot more to that, and I want to talk about it. But I immediately kind of got really, really absorbed in that, because the thing that stood out about the Maffetone training method is the only other place I'd seen this in the fitness world is in something called tactical fitness. But essentially, he was saying you can have performance increase and you can have longevity as well, because the natural disposition or the natural shelf life of a competitor is small. You compete, and you break your body down. That is the cost of the glory. So Phil Maffetone was saying, hey, that's not necessarily the case, especially with endurance athletes. So I got on his website, and bam, there you were on the website as one of the founding coaches. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got involved with him, aha moments that you may have had, or just a good story for that matter?
Yeah, I feel so fortunate that I started training the Maffetone method in actually the early to mid 90s. I, unlike a lot of athletes, I hadn't really competed in high school. Started running and somehow got this bug that I was going to do a marathon. And while I loved running, I had never competed, but I could get up to like 15 miles and then my world would just sort of fall apart. So I went to a coach and said, can you help me? And he put this heart rate monitor on me and told me I had to keep my heart rate at this rate. And I went out, I couldn't even run to keep my heart rate in there. I had to start walking. And to be honest, I gave it back to him and said, like, I'm a runner, like I'm really good, and then finally came back to if I actually wanted to run 26 miles, I was going to have to relearn and rethink. So he lent me this heart rate monitor, and I started doing that. And within 6 to 8 weeks, and obviously it was probably 20 at the time, so it's a little different, but I was back to running the paces that I had previously ran in this heart rate that I could maintain. And then I felt like I could run forever. And so I lived in Hawaii, so it was even better at the time to run in such a scenic, beautiful place.
Yeah.
But I really got hooked on that methodology then of how to train and how I felt so good training all the time. and how I was always able to really toss that distance on. So specifically of how I ended up working with Phil is I worked, so I started training Maffetone as myself, obviously as an athlete during that time, and then started sharing it with others and sharing it with others. And then all of a sudden, before you know it, I was coaching so many athletes. I was like, I need to like get a certification and things like that. So I started coaching more and more athletes over that time period. And I really was interested in VO2 max. I was also always very scientific and started working with power and as my business grew. And I got a lot of VO2 max testing, and I was really shocked at some of the zones that the VO2 max tested and went through. So I started collecting a lot of the VO2 max tests from a lot of the athletes I worked with, and I just couldn't put it together. So I had never met Phil Maffetone at the time, and I emailed him and said, look, I don't know what to do with this. I know what you're telling me works, and I have the data to prove from so many athletes over the years that what you're saying works, but can you give me any insight? Anyway, he ended up emailing me back, and since then, I think that was quite a few years ago now, but over that time, I've become good friends with him and really have learned a lot from him and have continued in his way. So, and back to the VO2 max question, it really doesn't matter. So, sometimes we go to these labs and we do all this fancy testing, and what we find out is there's so many different factors that come into play that it's good, useful information, but it doesn't trump heart rate and what you're doing in some of those tests that we really do in the field. And so sometimes that we try to do all these things that are so complicated and, expensive and cool and fun, but yet we really need to come back to the basics, and we find that is really what works.
Amen to that. I was for 15 years a Brazilian jiu-jitsu practitioner, and I was very fortunate enough that my coach was, this celebrity, this Royce Gracie, the guy who won the first UFCs, and he would come in with his, Portuguese accent and basically say, if you don't have the basics, you don't have shit. His whole game, every black belt on the planet has a very, very basic game. Like, what's coming, but they've perfected the basics so well that they're just an unstoppable force. But let's go back a little bit because not everybody's familiar with the Maffetone training method.
Yeah, great.
And I think I've tried to explain it, break it down into its bits and simplistic delivery, but I'd love to hear how you would say let's say I'm a runner. I run a couple of half marathons, maybe a marathon. I've been running for 5-10 years. What is Maffetone training, and why would I do it?
Maffetone training is learning to work with your body and work with your physiology versus training how somebody else has written in a book somewhere. Mm-hmm. It's sort of how I like to think about it. So we want to be very specific to you and to your body, and we want to work with your body, and so we can help form those adaptations with even at a cellular level to make your body perform better versus, and your body knows nothing about pace. It knows nothing about running or power. It knows about what you can do and how to make you a better human being for life. And that's really what Maffetone is doing, is understanding your physiology and really simply looking at how your body performs and recovers and taking it that way. So we start with...
Yeah, so that's a big strategic view. Now, tactically speaking, what are the methods that maybe, some runners haven't really locked onto yet, or, haven't really understood the full value of? What are some of those tactics that you use as a Maffetone coach?
As far as understanding the data and help me understand.
Well, I was thinking like heart rate training. Like, every runner understands they have a heart rate, but they don't understand really what the heart rate is trying to tell them. And the Maffetone method has a very specific calculation, and that calculation is telling you something about yourself. So tell me how you use heart rate when you train in Maffetone.
Yeah. So we start out with the basic formula that Phil Maffetone started with, back in the 1980s, which is 180 minus your age. And then we do some adaptations. If you're a seasoned athlete, we'll add 5. And with that said, if you have any health injuries or chronic injuries or you've been sick, we'll subtract from that. So we'll come up with this number that's very age-based in your practice. And so many athletes come and they say, well, I have a really high resting heart rate and I have a really low resting heart rate and I'm this and I'm that. And what we find is that we're all very, very similar. There is a curve where there is probably 5 to 10% on either side that we have to adjust to find their sort of correct Maffetone method, heart rate zones. And so we work through a series of testing with that. Mm-hmm. And what we're doing with the Maffetone heart rate that we've now got from that numbers is really doing our best to work with that physiology of staying out of that fight or flight zone. Mm-hmm. So you want me to go into that now? Or?
Yeah, you definitely can. I think I from, one of the ways that I've tried to describe it to people is that basically you have an aerobic heart rate zone where your body is using the oxygen out of your blood. Mm-hmm. And above that zone where you're talking about going into fight or flight, we're in an anaerobic state and we're pulling in other hormones and adrenals and all these other resources our body has. But this was the first time that I had ever heard of the concept of aerobic deficiency syndrome. And I'm a personal trainer, so I'm coaching people in fitness class at the time. And from that point, I started seeing it everywhere. And basically what this was showing me is that Americans, especially modern people, were so much staying in fight or flight when they exercised that a lot of times their exercise, while giving them a sense of reprieve and stress relief, was long-term detrimental to their body.
Yes.
And you're seeing, and we see this in running. So that heart rate is saying, hey, down here is a healthy place to run. And you can run up here a little bit, but if you're always running up here, your running career is going to be much shorter than it needs to be.
And the ironic part is that you're never going to be as fast by running fast all the time as if you take it down and work with your body and work on that aerobic fitness. You will have the power that is not possible if you stay at those upper zones.
Yeah.
And I think that's the part that once somebody gives us 6 to 9 to 12 months to really reestablish their physiology and how they're working with their body, and you can feel that strength, and then you can see it in races. So that's the cool flipping part about it, right?
It's amazing.
Is like you are not only doing the best thing for your body, you are not staying injured, you're working with your body, and guess what? You're going to be faster than if you had done any other kind of training.
Yeah, you're building a foundation with the Maffetone method that most people skip over because they don't know anything about it, so they're not training specifically to build that aerobic base. But it's, if you just go out and run, you're just target fixated on 1 mile or 2 miles or 3 miles, and your body adapts to the demands you put on it. And if you're always in that fight or flight state when you're running, hey, you just think that's what running is supposed to be. And the faster you go farther, you go faster. And the next thing you know, why am I injured? Why am I exhausted? Why am I so moody? Why do I have some other health issues that are happening? And this Maffetone method is very, very holistic. Gets into diet, gets into, relationships, mental health, gets into sexual health even. I mean, this is a full physiological approach, and running is the method that shows us if our efforts are working or not, essentially, right?
Right, 100%. And as you know, like as a coach, the first thing that I always say to someone is, how do you feel? How are you feeling? And, that's that piece of the pie, especially with triathletes. We sort of work with, we look at the data and we understand the ratios of your heart rate to your power. And, that's a piece. And staying within your zone is a piece. And then the other piece is subjective. How are you feeling? How are you recovering? Are you sleeping well? And while that comes across as like something extra, like that is a big part of our pie. And, and that's what's really cool about having this heart rate data and having that understanding is if you wait too long, you are going to see that in the data. But hopefully by having this more holistic view of our sport and what we're doing, we can catch it before we see it in the data.
Yeah. I think that's one of the things, I think if you say something to somebody, hey, exercise is supposed to make you healthier, it's supposed to make you, everybody's like, yeah, of course it is. But the way we actually exercise is not necessarily going down that road, especially when you talk about a long-term fitness model versus a short-term fitness model. Because what I've always observed is that fitness, as we get into our 20s, 30s, even 40s, 50s, is still to many people an extension of high school athletics.
Right.
They come out the gate, fitness is hard, running's supposed to be hard, this is what it is. And that's just a recipe for premature deterioration.
Right.
Is really what it is. So how do you coach people and get them to pull back? Because it's a very humbling experience to train your method, and it makes you step back. So how do you have those conversations with people?
I think that a lot of times that athlete has to have that realization that something needs to change. A lot of times they're not hitting their goal, they're not sleeping, they're having problems. So I can talk to a lot of people and sometimes they smile and then all of a sudden I'll get called back at like, wow, something needs to change. So I think that there's a lot, sort of a line of understanding, like maybe you know it, but a lot of people think they're different and unique and that they can really do this and it's really going to work for them. And then you have to have a little taste of failure or understanding that there's more out. And I did the same thing. Like I look back and that's definitely where I was. I think the biggest thing and the hardest part, I think, is the first 2 to 3 weeks when athletes try this and they don't feel like they're doing enough. I'm not doing enough. I'm not doing enough. And I'm like, well, do you feel like you don't have to take a nap all the time? Because I remember that you used to tell me that. Like when I would say, do you feel like at any point in time you could just lay down and fall asleep during the day? And like that's what I find a lot of these adrenal fatigue athletes, like I'm looking all day for a time to lay down. Like if I say that really resonates with them. Well, guess what? We need to get you to a spot where you're not thinking about how you're going to recover all the time, right? How much are you sleeping? And then the other thing that a lot of athletes struggle with, well, I only have 30 minutes a day. I only have this amount of time. I only have this. That's all I have. And then when we start to break things down, they only have that much because they're really broken down and they need, like they're not getting that rest. So sometimes they're really inefficient. So if we sort of holistically, when I start asking questions, well, guess what? Part of your training is you have to get 8 hours of sleep. You have to get 9 hours of sleep. And we need to do this consistently. And then I know that you don't have that much time, but we're going to find more time and we're going to have to, it's holistic. We can't just work on one part of our lives. And so I think that once we start breaking things down and then over a period of time, seeing the changes and seeing those subjective changes of how they feel and how much more efficient they are, how much their relationships are better at home, that a lot of that just plays together.
Yeah. So the recovery aspect, there's my dog. Maybe I'll get that edited out. But the whole concept, and now somebody's at my front door. So, delivery, UPS. We'll pause here.
Okay.
Wait to see if the dog's done. Juno, stop.
They don't follow cues well, do they?
Sometimes. Depends how excited they are. So recovery, that's, if we really kind of look culturally, I think most of our training issues are just, obviously some of it's just ignorance. We're learning more and more as a society, but there's these cultural values that started a long time ago. And obviously athletics perpetuated them. One of them I think about is, we come from a Puritan society. Hard work was the way we survived. And then we created an identity around it. And while hard work is a very, very admirable asset and we have to retain that, but if we look at the science of performance, recovery is king.
Absolutely.
Long term. Like when you put a plan together for an athlete, there's recovery days in there. And if they don't hit them, you can kiss your PR goodbye. So getting that into mindset, and you put me on this thing right here, which is called a whoop strap. And I love it because every morning I wake up and I get a little graph that tells me how much I've recovered. And sometimes I'll be honest, I'm mad at it. I'm like, are you kidding me? I did this yesterday. I did this yesterday. It doesn't care. It's just,
it doesn't care.
It's like, hey, your heart rate variability's off. You're tired. Today's not a good day to do a 20 miler or whatever, So
yeah,
getting that, and even with weightlifters, your muscles grow on the days off.
Yeah.
And it's really, really hard in a culture that says more is more, not to, pound that word down, but that seems to be the fight that this method really is pushing against. It's a cultural battle, versus the science. And the science says, we need to peak out and do those hard things, but not probably as much as you think in order to really stay on the road and hit your PRs and continue to do so. Now, one of those things that I know is a big hurdle, and it's a real personal issue for people, is diet. So Maffetone has a big diet component. Tell me a little bit about your philosophy about diet, your application of diet with yourself as well as your athletes, and let us kind of give us some philosophical understanding about where Maffetone is coming from with diet.
Yeah, and I veer somewhat with Phil Maffetone on diet, although I'm 80% with him or so. And it helps that I personally have celiac disease, so I'm gluten-free and wheat-free and everything like that. But I do think that there's almost a periodization. So a lot of athletes now, we almost work through a nutritional periodization, especially athletes that are very competitive, or like their focus is a specific goal or time. And then we will go down and we will utilize other measures to make sure that they're at race weight. It is not good to stay at race weight all year long in any way, shape, or form. And so that periodization through the year, I think it can be useful. I also think it's useful to utilize nutrition in different ways. Utilizing carbohydrates off season, I think, is great to do more off season with the increase of protein. And as Americans, we were sort of went through those 80 years of fat is bad, and so really focusing then on those high value fats with the avocados and oils and things like that. But what I've really have found that Maffetone and I we've had lively discussions about this, is that what I see with some athletes who are much more pure in their form is that we're not getting enough glycogen stores. We really have to focus on the rice and the potatoes and things like that to make sure that we are fueled for our events and what we're expecting of our bodies. Even when we are fat adapted, which I think that concept sort of in the last couple of years has sort of went overboard a little bit, where people were trying to fuel their bodies with broccoli. And there's a science that says we utilize glucose. And even when we are fat adapted, or you and I who train with a lot of the zone 2, we're still utilizing 30 to 40% of glycogen stores. Yeah. And so we have to make sure that we're not stressing our bodies by not underutilizing carbohydrates in that.
Yeah.
But back on a very simple beginner level, just cutting out the crap, right? And making sure that we're always giving our body good fuel for food and utilizing all of those fresh sources and ensuring that we have the protein and those good fats. So that
Things
was
that I
good.
found fascinating about the Maffetone approach to diet, and I totally get it, it's real hard to have a program and a philosophy and not have some absolutes in there that are debatable. And diet is such a customized, individualized thing that it's too hard of a concept to say something and have it mean equal for everybody. It just doesn't happen.
Right.
But one of the things that he talks about that is most of us can all get on board, principally speaking, is the idea of inflammation. And inflammation is where disease breeds, and it's also where injuries become apparent and exacerbated. And that inflammation cycle starts in the diet.
Absolutely.
Just like you say, cut out the junk. Simple carbohydrates and just processed foods create an abundance of inflammation. And you could probably, if you just cut out all the crap, you probably would have 50% less injuries as a runner. Even if you had maybe very questionable form, you probably could get injured a lot less just on a better diet alone.
Yeah, and I'll add on this, and Eric, I'm not sure if you and I have ever talked about this, and I'll be honest, this is hard for me. I'm also a registered nurse, and so sometimes when some people can call things pseudoscience and it's debatable, it's hard to get behind, but personally I can get behind, and I've had a couple athletes on that inflammation is, you can do IgA testing now, getting my letters mixed up. You can do inflammation testing now just by a kit at Target,
Wow.
right? And yeah, and also food allergy testing. Now, that is not IgA or not IgG testing that you would get done at an allergist office or your physician's office, and I encourage anybody to do that. And if they will tell, when I talk to those clinicians, they're not real big on I'll make sure that I can give you the link to put in the show notes, but about the inflammation and the reaction to that food that I've had a lot of success with personally, and with several other athletes who have dealt with that. You just know something's not quite right. And what's interesting is you really have to do it about every 6 to 9 months because, allergies are largely formed on what your exposures are. And so exposing yourself to a lot of different things, like bananas came up high for me one time. Wow. Bananas are, they're sort of part of our diet, right?
Staple,
and
yeah.
Staple of our with that said, Phil Maffetone yelled at me dramatically one time for eating banana in front of him because of that high glucose response, and told me that was not appropriate. But and then, a lot of times we can learn a lot about that. And I notice a dramatic difference when I do that every 6 to 9 months and cut out those foods that I'm showing high for.
Yeah.
Some other people, my husband, for instance, he shows low all the time to absolutely everything. And so it's sort of an interesting point that I think some of us, and especially probably with a chronic illness like celiac, that makes sense that I have a higher level. Mm-hmm. And I found that it's very different athlete to athlete. So that's something else. But I think that just like you're speaking to, that decrease in inflammation is such a massive, massive component that so many Americans miss out on.
Yeah. And some people are lucky enough that they find things, they might go on a detox, and then if they're smart, they bring stuff back in, and then they can really get that, that observation, that clarity of like, oh, my body doesn't like that. But, they may have been eating it for 20 or 30 years, and it just felt normal to them, that, sense of dis-ease in the intestines and in the stomach that's just what life felt like. And it's hard to get that perspective without or just taking some time off of it.
Yeah, and I think when you read Phil Maffetone's diet, he really does encourage people to do that, to go back to really basic foods and then add one in. And I think that's sort of a shortcut maybe that some of us can do that aren't willing to do that, the long haul of that.
Yeah, was the carbohydrate sensitivity diet. It was like 2 weeks long, right?
Yeah, he does that, but on top of that, he really asks that you take, all foods out and then slowly add back foods back in.
Yeah.
And some people really are able to do that well, but I don't I don't get a big buy-in with that. So, yeah, so I think that there's other ways to do that. I think it's good for us all once in a while, but definitely if you're experiencing like extreme fatigue, like sometimes there's your abdominal discomfort, or you're feeling bloated, or you're feeling any of those kind of GI symptoms, like it's a good thing to get to the bottom of, because a lot of that is inflammation, or that is something that isn't we're dealing with. We're not having homeostasis within our body.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to dig in and understand that a little bit better.
Yeah, and that's interesting. I love the concept of homeostasis. For people who don't know, is that your body always is trying to balance itself out. It's the intelligence of the body. Now, the body might not necessarily do it in a safe way. One of the things that kind of popped up, and a good aha moment for me in studying some of this Maffetone stuff, was if you are, constantly training anaerobically and you have that aerobic deficiency, then one of the things is your body's burning glycogen first and foremost, like all the time when it's training. And so when you get done running, what do? But you crave sugar. And so your body wants it to balance it out. So one of the interesting subtle symptoms of overtraining that I picked up was I want sugar and stimulants because I'm fatigued. My body's exhausted. My adrenals are shot. Give me a Monster Energy drink now, stat.
Exactly.
And if that's,
Yeah.
and so many of us have been there before, or maybe are constantly going through it. So, when you're young, you can drain those adrenals a little bit and have, bounce back. But I'm 44. When I'm in adrenal fatigue, life is not pretty.
Yeah. And I think that's the key too, is understanding when your body is sort of talking to you and bailing back early. Because when in the earliest times, you can get back, but when you get to that extreme, it's really hard, especially as we age. I'll start to work with athletes who are in that end stage, and then we have to come back to almost no training or very little for a long period of time before we can get to a point where we can train normally. And just the disruption in their life and how they feel. And not only that, like as athletes, we feel like we're a failure, right? So you're trying harder and harder and harder, but yet you're failing. Mm-hmm. And the other thing is your body will start to put on weight or lose weight. And so I have a lot of athletes who come to me and say, Christine, like I'm not eating I'm eating, people are telling me that I must be closet eating because look, this is all I eat and I'm gaining weight. And so when you have stressed your body, when it's worried about survival, because just like you said, we're always worried about your body's number one is keeping this homeostasis. And the sort of goal too is like keeping you from killing you. And so when you stress your body in these unknown ways, it's going to do things to pull you back.
That's right.
And so one of the, don't want to name names, but there's a lot of these fitness organizations that go in and you get scores and you get points and you have these high heart rates and they feel really good, right? People come out and I burned 517 calories today and I reached X and blah, blah. And what happens over a long period of time is they get run down. They feel awful. They're not losing any weight. I mean, you don't see these awesome weight loss stories. And why? Because one, they're putting themselves into this adrenal situation. Your body's going to hold on to that because of that stress. Mm-hmm. And then two, you're just burning the sugar off that you had in your bloodstream. You're not burning any fat. Yeah. When you look at when you're in zone 4 and zone 5, I mean, almost 90 to 100% of your energy is from your bloodstream or from the glycogen stores in your liver or into the muscles. So that's why coming back and burning 50 to 60% of your fat for fuel out of your fat is obviously going to be the most effective way to lose weight and to maintain your weight.
Yeah, the caloric model, while it's a good basic, math for us to kind of understand what's in our food, it really just killed some critical thinking brain cells, the average American, on how weight loss works. It fed the more is more mentality. And people forget that we're still cavemen. We just have iPhones. You know, our body uses fat for fuel. And when our body is stressed out, it thinks we're getting ready to go through some type of famine or something like
Right,
our ancestors did.
exactly.
So, hey, let's keep the fat because we need this because you're stressed out. So when we're always in that fight or flight, if you veer off of your 2000 calorie whatever macronutrient to workout ratio that you have, as soon as you veer off, your body's be like, oh, thank God, give me some fat, and you're gonna gain it all right back.
Exactly, exactly. It's also really interesting, and what changed sort of my diet prescription working with athletes and adding more carbohydrates in was working with University of Colorado. Obviously, I work with Training Peaks, so I'm lucky enough to be in Boulder in that lab quite a bit. And maybe 3 to 4 years ago, when, and paleo has its place, right? It has its merits, but probably not for endurance athletes, training 40 to 50, 20 to 30 hours a week. And they were actually doing muscle biopsies. It's so incredibly cool. So they would follow up, started with muscle ultrasound, and they can actually understand how much glycogen stores are in the muscles. Because there also, during that same time, was sort of a swing of, even at the professional level, especially with triathletes, and they were working with a lot of continental cyclists from Europe, where they were finding these athletes who had always performed at this really high level all of a sudden weren't able to peak, and they weren't able to sort of, meet their critical points in training. And when they brought them into the lab, they can look through ultrasound and then verify that. In the earlier years, they were verifying that with muscle biopsy and seeing the decrease in glycogen stores within their muscles.
Wow.
And so that's really where I sort of started adding back in those carbohydrates. But it goes with this whole thing, like our body has a set way in which it works. And as much as humans, as we try to manipulate that, it's always going to come back to like, this is homeostasis and this is what we need to do. And how can we work with our bodies with that? And part of that is that carbohydrate component. I really strongly believe is that you have to have that within your body to keep within that.
Yeah. I pulled something up, and I'm going to do a little technology thing here, but I'm going to see if I can share my screen. So I pulled up this picture today that I've used many times. Can you see this?
I cannot.
Stress performance curve.
Oh, yes.
Is it on the screen?
Yep.
Okay, I'll edit it in there. But what this was one of my big aha moments. I learned this in tactical fitness, a system called TacFit that was created by a very smart, intelligent guy named Scott Sonnen. So, but he shared this with me, and he basically reminded us all that exercise is stress. It is self-induced stress, and that when we overtrain or undertrain, we become lower performers. And there's this zone called eustress right in the middle. And that, as athletes, that is where we try to put a lot of our efforts, a lot of our meal planning, our recovery time, so that we can spend less time on the outer edges and more time in that positive eustress. And one of the things that he said that just knocked me on my butt, it was so smart. He says that we experience something as humans. He was talking about homeostasis, but he was talking about the self-medicating pendulum. And he says, listen, if you spend all this time in distress, a higher level of stress in that right side of the graph, and you spend a bunch of time over there, your body at the end of the day or the end of the week or whenever is going to swing back equally to the hypostress side of the thing. So what can that look like? That can look like a drug addiction. That can look like just complete lethargy. It can look like illness, anything that's going to slow you down. And that was
just perfect
right there. I was like, oh, exercise is self-induced stress. Dosage is everything.
Right.
And now it's just like, oh, well, this is the long-term model that that I had been looking for. So
Craving, or just that, yeah, I totally get that.
yeah, it's really powerful stuff. Okay, I know we're running long. I've really enjoyed this conversation, but I wanted to ask you a couple more things before we finish that.
Okay.
Tell me what you're most passionate about right now, as far as endurance sports is going
Oh, you really have to hit me on a good one.
on.
Well, I think what am I most passionate about is how can we use this time in history? We're all in this unique time in history, right? Where we're in flux of how we are going to measure ourselves as athletes because of the racing and the unknowns that are in the future, is how can we use this time for our advantage?
Mhm.
Right? As athletes, anytime that there's change or there's something, a lot of athletes can't, that unknown. But how can we use our knowledge and build even a stronger foundation so when we come back to race or we come back to perform, that we can come out stronger through this period? And so as a coach, that's really what I'm working for now. And it's really exciting. It's really exciting to think that, every athlete who had a race planned or had something, we had to calm down and we have to do all of this. But guess what? We get more time. We get more time to build that fitness. We get more time to meet our goals. So to best utilizing that time that we have now, I think is really what I'm keyed in on.
Yeah, I agree with that. I was pushing hard for a goal in April, like and when it got canceled, I was like, you know what, that might be a good thing because come November, I think I'll be in a better spot to actually achieve that goal.
But Eric, I do have to say, you were so ready.
Don't say that.
I'm sorry to say it, but there was 3 or 4 of you guys who were just, there's a couple athletes I was like, this is really a good thing because you were so right there. And man,
shouldn't have told me that. I won't sleep tonight.
Sorry,
It was
hard.
a great training cycle, and I'm looking forward to what we're doing now as well. So, last question, or 2 more questions. The next question I wanted to ask you is, what do you want? If you could just say one thing to endurance athletes, what's the big takeaway that you want them, in all your years of coaching and your experience working with many different people? Give me some good old fashioned wisdom, big takeaway. What would that be?
Slow down. Slow down.
Nice. Yeah.
And you will not believe how fast you will become if you slow down.
Yeah.
And when you're going too slow, guess what? You can go slower. I mean that so dearly and so deeply. And it's been like, that's the great thing for me is to be able to see the aha moment with all of these athletes who really take that down, listen to their body, and accomplish things that they never would have thought they could accomplish.
And you're not saying that all of your runs are slow. You're just saying that all of your runs can't be here.
Yeah, but I'm saying the majority of them need to be slow.
Yeah, but people say like, well, how am I going to run a 7.5 minute mile if I'm always training at 10 minutes? They don't see that, hey, there's some speed work you got to do. There's other types of runs, but the base is, it's a pyramid, and the base is the biggest part, and that base is the slow runs like you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes you don't even realize what you're capable of until you really do that for a long period of time. Yeah.
Amen to that. I have 100% buy-in now. Last question, how can people find you if they want more Christine?
You go to t2coaching.net and there's more information there. And you can email me too. A lot of people just email me with different questions or different how-to. And even if I'm not going to coach someone full time, I love to just spit some information back to them that's really relevant to them and that can hopefully make a difference. And Eric, I'm really looking forward to hopefully being able to work with you sometime, coaching running, and for you to be able to share your experience and all you've learned and your expertise So really looking forward to that day.
I am too. I'm really excited going in for some extra certifications in the fall, and just it's been such an educational, wonderful experience working with you, and I just
Oh, thanks.
even more. So, Christine, thank you on behalf of the SIVA Distance Project, and
Great. Well, thank you for having me, and I can't wait to watch all the great to come and for me to be able to learn from you all. So
awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, sister. I hope you stay healthy and stay safe in these weird times.
Okay.
Thank you for
Sounds like a plan. Bye-bye.
Take care.